The champagne glass slipped from my sister's hand. Not dropped, not thrown. Just released. Like her fingers had forgotten how to hold things the moment she looked out the country club window and saw what was coming up the drive. 30 seconds earlier, she'd been laughing. The whole reception had been laughing. 200 wedding guests in silk and diamonds, watching my father stand at the microphone with a cream-colored envelope in his hand. "Before we continue," he'd said, his voice carrying that particular smugness wealthy men perfect over decades, "there's something that needs to be addressed about my daughter Charlotte. Not the bride, the other daughters. Me. The one standing against the back wall in my catering uniform, holding a tray of champagne I'd been serving all night. This letter," he continued, pulling folded papers from the envelope, "represents a family decision that's been difficult but necessary." He'd smiled at his audience. They'd smiled back. And I'd stood perfectly still, watching it happen, already knowing what was coming. Because I'd spent 6 months preparing for exactly this moment. The papers rustled as he unfolded them. Charlotte has made choices that don't align with this family's values. Her employment situation, her lifestyle, her refusal to accept help or guidance. Someone near the dance floor whispered something. Another person nodded. My sister, the bride, stood beside our father in her $15,000 gown, radiant and victorious. "So we've decided," my father said, "that it's time for Charlotte to pursue her own path, separately." He held up the letter like evidence. "Effective immediately. She is no longer welcome at family events or properties." The room had gone quiet then. Not uncomfortable quiet. Interested quiet. This was entertainment. And then the sound started. Deep, mechanical, growing louder by the second. Someone frowned. "What is that?" My father kept talking, but his voice was already being swallowed by the noise outside. A low, powerful rumble that made the crystal chandeliers tremble. That made the windows vibrate in their frames. That made 200 people turn toward the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the country club drive. And that's when my sister's champagne glass hit the marble floor. Because rolling up the manicured driveway, past the valet stand, past the fountains, past the rose gardens was a convoy. 3 black Chevy Suburbans, 2 military police cruisers, and a Humvee with a mounted flag. The United States Army flag, snapping in the wind like a declaration of war. My name is Colonel Charlotte Reid, United States Army. And the family that spent 10 years treating me like hired help was about to learn why you should never mistake silence for weakness, or a catering uniform for someone who doesn't command battalions. I arrived at the Riverside Country Club at 4:47 p.m., 13 minutes before my sister's wedding ceremony. The venue sat on 40 acres of Virginia horse country, white columns, sprawling lawns, the kind of place where old money goes to remind everyone it still exists. I parked my 15-year-old Corolla in the service lot beside the dumpsters and kitchen entrance. Not because I had to. Because I wanted to see if anyone would notice. They didn't. The head caterer, a woman named Margaret who'd hired me 2 weeks ago, met me at the staff entrance. "You're cutting it close," she said, not unkindly. "Traffic," I replied. She handed me the uniform, black pants, white shirt, black vest, The invisibility costume that lets servers move through wealthy spaces like ghosts. I changed in the staff bathroom and pulled my hair back into a tight bun. Military regulation tight, though nobody here would recognize that. In the mirror, I looked exactly like what they expected. A 42-year-old woman grateful for part-time work, serving champagne at someone else's celebration. Perfect. I wasn't nervous. I had been trained for rooms far more dangerous than this one. 18 years in the Army teaches you how to stand in spaces designed to make you disappear, how to observe without being seen, how to file every face, every exit, every power dynamic like battlefield intelligence. Through the service window, I could see them gathering. The ceremony hadn't started yet. Guests milled around the terrace, drinking pre-ceremony cocktails, admiring the gardens. My father held court near the fountain. Colonel James Reid, U.S. Army, retired. 71 years old. Still carried himself like he owned every room he entered. Silver hair, tailored suit. The particular arrogance of men who spent their careers being saluted and never quite adjusted to civilian life. My sister Emma stood beside him in her bridal suite robe, laughing at something someone said. 28 years old, marketing director. Everything our father had wanted in a daughter, social, polished, married well. Everything I'd apparently failed to be. My mother drifted between groups, making sure everyone had drinks, checking details. The dutiful general's wife, even after 30 years of marriage. I picked up a tray and pushed through the swinging door into the theater. The wedding was perfect. Of course it was. Emma had spent 18 months planning every detail with the precision of a military operation. Which was ironic, considering she'd spent our entire childhood mocking the actual military. 200 guests filled white chairs arranged in perfect rows. String quartet, rose petals, sunset lighting that turned everything golden. I stood against the back wall with the other servers, holding champagne, watching. My father walked Emma down the aisle like he was presenting a trophy. Not one person looked at me. Not one person recognized me. I'd been home for 6 months, working part-time catering jobs, living in a studio apartment, being exactly who they expected me to be. The daughter who'd failed. Who'd wasted 20 years in the Army and had nothing to show for it. Who'd finally given up and come crawling back. That's what they believed. That's what I'd let them believe. The ceremony concluded. The crowd moved to the reception ballroom. I followed, carrying champagne, refilling glasses, being invisible. Dinner was announced. Toasts began. My father stood at the head table, microphone in hand, performing. My daughter Emma, he said, his voice warm with pride, has always known exactly who she was meant to be. He paused for effect. She's smart, accomplished, everything a father could hope for. The room applauded. I stood near the kitchen door, tray in hand, and watched him not look at me. Which is why, he continued, his tone shifting slightly, I'm so grateful she chose a path that brought her success. Another pause. Unlike some people who waste years chasing things that were never meant for them. A few people shifted uncomfortably. My mother lowered her eyes. My father pulled the cream-colored envelope from his jacket. Actually, he said, since we're all here, there's something that needs to be addressed. Emma's new husband frowned slightly. But Emma smiled. She knew what was coming. This letter, my father said, holding it up, represents a formal family decision. He looked directly at me for the first time all evening. Charlotte, would you come here, please? The room went quiet. 200 faces turned toward me. I set down my tray, walked slowly to the center of the ballroom. Every step measured, military bearing, shoulders back. Most of them probably thought I was nervous. I wasn't. I was counting down. T-3 minutes. My father handed me the envelope like he was serving divorce papers. This has been a difficult decision, he said to the room, but families sometimes have to make hard choices. I opened the envelope. Read slowly. Charlotte, after careful consideration, we have determined that your continued presence in this family creates an uncomfortable situation for everyone. Your employment choices, lifestyle, and refusal to accept guidance have made it clear that you do not share our values. Effective immediately, you are no longer invited to family events, holidays, or gatherings. This decision is final. Signed, James Reid, Catherine Reid, Emma Reid Morrison. I folded it carefully. Put it back in the envelope. Thank you for putting it in writing, I said quietly. My father frowned. You don't seem surprised. I'm not. Good, then you understand this is for the best. I looked around the ballroom, at the guests watching, at my sister trying not to smile, at my mother staring at her plate. I have something for you too, I said. My father's expression flickered. What? I reached into my vest pocket and pulled out my phone. I checked the time. T-90 seconds. You spent 20 years telling people I wasted my life in the military, I said calmly, that I should have gotten a real job, settled down, been more like Emma. Charlotte, my mother started. You told everyone I'd failed, I continued, that I'd finally given up and come home to work whatever jobs would take me. My father's jaw tightened. This isn't the time. You're right, I interrupted. It's not. I looked at him directly. But they're here anyway. And right on cue, the sound started. At first, nobody understood what they were hearing. A deep rumble, engines, multiple vehicles moving in formation. Someone near the windows frowned. What is that? The sound grew louder. Closer. My father's face went pale. Because he recognized that sound. 25 years in the Army teaches you what a military convoy sounds like. The first Suburban appeared in the circular drive. Black government plates, flags mounted on the hood. Then the second, third, the MP cruisers, the Humvee. All of them rolling to a stop directly in front of the country club entrance. The ballroom went absolutely silent. Champagne glasses stopped moving. Conversations died. 200 people stood frozen, staring out the windows. My sister's champagne hit the floor. The crystal shattered with a sound like a gunshot. And through those floor-to-ceiling windows, I watched 4 uniformed officers step out of the vehicles. 2 Army, 1 Marines, 1 Air Force. All of them in dress uniforms. All of them heading directly for the entrance. My father grabbed my arm. What did you do? I pulled free calmly. I invited my colleagues. You're what? The ballroom doors opened. The officers entered. 200 guests turned as one. The lead officer, an Army brigadier general, stars gleaming on his shoulders, scanned the room once. His eyes found mine. He crossed the ballroom floor with purpose, stopped 3 feet from where I stood, came to attention. "Colonel Reid," he said, his voice carried to every corner of the room. "Ma'am." He saluted. Sharp, precise, respectful. I returned it. "General Morrison." Behind me, someone gasped. My father made a sound like he'd been hit. The Marine officer stepped forward next. "Colonel," he said, another salute. "Apologies for the interruption." "Not at all, Colonel Davies." The room had gone absolutely dead. Emma stared at me like I was a stranger. My mother's hands covered her mouth. General Morrison held out a leather folder. "Your orders, ma'am," he said. "Change of command ceremony is scheduled for Monday at Fort Myer." "A change of command," someone whispered. I took the folder. "Thank you, General." "The secretary sends his congratulations," Morrison added. He wanted to be here personally, but the situation overseas required his attention. "Understood." Morrison stepped back. The Air Force officer, a lieutenant colonel, stepped forward. "Colonel Reid, we have the briefing materials you requested for tomorrow's session with the Joint Chiefs." "Joint Chiefs," my father's voice cracked. I looked at him calmly. "Yes, the meeting about multi-service coordination for emergency evacuations." I turned back to the lieutenant colonel. "Thank you, I'll review them tonight." The officers stood at attention while the ballroom processed what they were seeing. Finally, Emma found her voice. "You're a colonel." I looked at my sister, at her $15,000 dress, her perfect hair, her complete shock. "Yes." "But you," she couldn't finish. "Work part-time catering jobs?" I finished for her. "I do, during terminal leave before assuming command of the 3rd Brigade at Fort Carson." A silence. 3,500 soldiers, I added quietly. $600 million budget, 4-year command assignment. My father sat down heavily. General Morrison cleared his throat. "Colonel, we should discuss the transition timeline." "Of course." I gestured toward an empty conference room off the ballroom. "Shall we?" The officers followed me. But before I left, I turned back to the 200 guests. To my father, who looked like he'd aged 10 years in 10 minutes. To my sister, standing in her bridal gown, surrounded by shattered glass. To my mother, tears running down her face. "Enjoy the reception," I said calmly. "I have work to do." And I walked out of that ballroom flanked by 4 senior officers, while my family stood frozen in the wreckage of everything they'd believed about me. The conference room was quiet. General Morrison closed the door behind us. The other officers relaxed slightly. "That went well," Colonel Davies said dryly. I almost smiled. "Thank you all for coming." "Wouldn't have missed it," Morrison replied. "Your father's face when we walked in was worth the drive from the Pentagon." "He didn't know," I said. "It wasn't a question." None of them did. I'd kept it that way for 6 months. Come home, take in the catering jobs. Let them believe exactly what they wanted to believe. That their daughter had failed. That the Army hadn't wanted her. That she'd finally realized they'd been right all along. Meanwhile, I'd been promoted to full colonel. Selected for Brigade Command. Shortlisted for the next round of general officer nominations. But I'd let them think I was serving champagne because I had nowhere else to go. Morrison handed me the actual orders. "Your change of command is Monday. The secretary wants you in Colorado by the end of the month. I'll be ready. And the Joint Chiefs briefing tomorrow is mandatory. I know. He studied me carefully. You could have told them months ago. I know. Why wait? I looked through the conference room window at the ballroom. At my father, still sitting at the head table, staring at nothing. At Emma, trying to salvage her reception while guests whispered and pointed. At my mother, watching the door I'd walked through. Because they needed to see who they'd become, I said quietly. Not who I was. Morrison nodded slowly. Fair enough. I returned to the ballroom 30 minutes later. The reception had lost its rhythm entirely. Conversations were scattered, uncomfortable. Half the guests had already left. The string quartet played to a nearly empty dance floor. My father stood when he saw me. Charlotte. Just my name, not an accusation, not a command. Just uncertainty. I walked to where he stood. My mother appeared beside him. Emma hovered nearby, her perfect wedding dissolving around her. You're a colonel, my father said. Yes. For how long? 3 years. He processed that, and before that. Lieutenant colonel, major, captain, lieutenant. I went through the ranks the same as everyone else. You let us think. He stopped. I let you think exactly what you wanted to think, I corrected gently. My sister stepped forward. This whole time you were just, what, pretending? No, I said. I was serving champagne. Part-time work during terminal leave is completely legal. I just didn't correct your assumptions about why. Emma's face flushed. You humiliated me at my wedding. No, I said calmly. I accepted an invitation from colleagues. The humiliation is yours because you spent months planning how to publicly disown me, and it backfired. My mother finally spoke. We didn't know. I looked at her, really looked at her. 68 years old, still beautiful, still playing the role of dutiful wife even now. You never asked, I said softly. You called twice in 10 years, she whispered, Christmas and my birthday. And every time, you spent 5 minutes asking about my life before handing the phone to Dad so he could tell me about Emma's promotion, or Emma's engagement, or Emma's house. My mother's eyes filled with tears. I tried, she said. Not hard enough. My father found his voice again. You should have told us about the promotions, the assignments, we're your family. Am I asked. The question hung between us. Because that letter says otherwise. He had no answer. I pulled the cream-colored envelope from my pocket. Held it up. You want to know something interesting about this? Nobody spoke. I've been carrying a letter, too. I reached into my other pocket and pulled out a second envelope. I wrote this 6 months ago, right after my promotion was confirmed. I handed it to my father. He opened it with shaking hands. Read silently. His face went through a series of expressions: confusion, shock, disbelief. What is it? Emma demanded. My father couldn't answer. I did it for him. It's a deed, I said, to this country club. My mother gasped. I bought it 4 months ago, through an LLC. The board doesn't even know yet. My sister stared at me. Why? Because I knew you'd have your wedding here, and I knew Dad would use it as a stage to humiliate me publicly. I looked at my father. So I made sure that when you did, you'd be standing on property I own. The ballroom had gone absolutely silent. Everyone still, there was listening now. Your family membership, I continued. I can revoke it. Your standing tea times, gone. The charity events you chair here every year, I'm the one who approves them now. My father sat down again. Harder this time. You did all this, he started. To prove a point, I finished, that maybe you should have asked what your daughter was actually doing instead of assuming she'd failed. My phone buzzed. I checked it. General Morrison, your ride is here. I looked at my family one last time. I have a flight to catch. Pentagon briefing is at 700. Charlotte, wait, my mother said. I stopped. She walked closer, tears streaming now. I'm sorry, she whispered, for all of it, for not asking, for not defending you, for letting him, she glanced at my father, for letting this happen. I studied her carefully. Looked for manipulation, for performance. Found only genuine grief. I believe you, I said softly. Then can you, she hesitated, can you forgive us? I thought about that. About 10 years of phone calls that lasted 5 minutes. About never being asked about my deployments, my medals, my career. About being treated like the family disappointment while I was commanding battalions overseas. About standing in this ballroom in a catering uniform, serving champagne to people who thought I was nobody. Maybe, I said, someday. But not today. My mother nodded, accepting. I turned to my father. He looked smaller now, older, the arrogance gone. You were wrong about me, I said quietly. As I know. For 20 years you were wrong. As I know. And you never once asked if you were. He couldn't look at me. I picked up my bag from where I'd left it by the service door. Walked toward the exit. My father's voice stopped me. Charlotte. I turned. He stood slowly, shakily. Then he did something I'd never seen him do in my entire life. He stood at attention and saluted me. Not perfect, his hand trembled, his back wasn't quite straight. But real. Tears ran down his face as he held it. I'm sorry, he said, for all of it. I returned the salute. Sharp military, the way I'd been taught. Then I dropped it and walked out. Behind me, I heard my mother sobbing. Heard Emma trying to say something. Heard the ballroom full of witnesses, processing what they'd just seen. And I didn't look back. Because some battles you win not by destroying your enemy, but by making them realize they were fighting the wrong person all along. 3 months later, I assumed command of the 3rd Brigade at Fort Carson. 3,500 soldiers stood at attention while I took the colors. My mother attended, sat in the front row, cried through the entire ceremony. My father didn't come. But a week later, I received a letter. Handwritten, 5 pages. 20 years of apologies he should have made while I was standing in front of him. I read it once, filed it away. Maybe someday I'll answer it. Maybe not. Because forgiveness isn't something you owe people. It's something you give when you're ready. And I'm not there yet. But I might be. Someday. They called me a failure. Handed me a letter disinviting me from the family. At my sister's wedding. While I was serving champagne in a catering uniform. Then a military convoy arrived. 4 senior officers walked into that country club, saluted me, called me Colonel, and my family realized the daughter they'd disowned was commanding thousands of soldiers, while they'd been assuming she couldn't even get a real job. I'm not a waitress. I'm Colonel Charlotte Reid, U.S. Army, Brigade Commander. And the family that spent 20 years underestimating me just learned what happens when you never bother to ask what someone actually does. Some warriors wear uniforms every day. Some wear them only when it's time to remind people who they really are. Have you ever been underestimated by the people who should have known you best? Tell me below. And if you know someone whose silence was mistaken for weakness, send this to them. We don't break. We just wait for exactly the right moment.